this session, we are joining Mitra Trust for a panel discussion that dwells into the factors shaping queer mental health today. This conversation will explore the cultural context, legal and systemic challenges on the lived experiences of queer and trans individuals. If you scan this QR code, there is a resource that you can download that is relevant for this discussion. Grounded in the realities of the queer community, this panel aims to shed light on the unique mental health struggles faced at these intersections and foster a deeper understanding of how we can collectively work towards healing and support. The speakers for this panel are Nagamalika Karthikeyan. We request you to take stage now, a queer journalist with the News Minute and the founder of Inclusive Newsroom. Satya G, a queer lawyer. Divya Khandukuri, who is the founder and associated with the Blue Dawn. Bhairavi Prakash, who is the founder of Mitra Trust. Ably moderating this session is Rahel, who is a queer mental health practitioner. Over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. To do justice to this topic will take a lifetime and then some more. But we have 60 minutes for now, so we're just going to make do with that. I'm going to jump straight in. Someone once told me every impactful conversation starts with the why. So why are we doing this? Why are we talking about the reality of the queer lived experience? Number one, mostly because queer mental health is so misconstrued. It is seen as an anomaly. It is pathologized to look like something that exists outside the bell curve. And I think no discourse is complete without considering the queer angle. And we've been in and out of so many discussions in this festival, been in and out of so many mental health discussions so far, where there is always a scope to delve into the lived experience of queer folk, to delve into queer mental health, but it never really is done, right? So that's also why we're here. And another reason why we're here is because to understand queer mental health, what we're really missing, which is the heart of the puzzle piece, is that queer lived experiences, what queer lived experiences look like while navigating all these systems, legal systems, medical systems, mental health care, and every queer person's life is right in the middle of all these intersections. And what does it mean beyond? We've got theories, we've got statistics, we've got laws, we've got so many ideas of what queer mental health is. But what is it really in the reality of things? And that's what we're going to find out today. I'm Rahel. I'm from Mitra Trust along with Bhairavi. Mitra Trust is a space where we do therapeutic spaces of self-reflection and self-expression for the queer community and for survivors of abuse, all of which are free of cost, all of which are online. I also work in some schools in Chennai where I help build mental health curriculum and I help teach the same, almost like SEL. And I am that flavor of queer that cannot sit quite properly in a chair. And I guess I understand that's a very shared experience among most of us. So you're going to see me squirming around. And also I write and perform poetry that helps understand, that speaks about the bizarreness of the human condition. And yeah, I guess if I'm going to be rapping today, so that's my rap career debut as well. We've got a stellar panel lined up for us today, and I'm going to introduce each of them, each representing a lot of expertise in their fields, each representing different intersections that that impact queer mental health very, very deeply. And they offer so much, they bring so much compassion to their line of work, which is also what makes them a remarkable panel. So I'm going to start with Nagamalika Karthikeyan here is a queer journalist and communication strategist and is the co-founder and the co-lead of Inclusive Newsrooms project, which is making the Indian media more queer sensitive. She is an expert on queer issues and gender with deep interests in health, education, and social justice. Inclusive Newsrooms is a project by the News Minute, by Queer Chennai Chronicles, and Queer Beat to make the Indian media ecosystem more sensitive towards LGBTQIA+ individuals and identities. The project is supported by the Google News Initiative. Please put your hands together to welcome Raga. Up next, we have Satya. Satya is a queer lawyer who works as a law clerk and intern with Justice Anand Venkatesh in the Madras High Court and has worked on many landmark cases. Satya is here with their partner Sanjesh, along with whom they started their law office, which focuses on laws surrounding gender and sexuality and human rights spanning both civil and criminal sides. Please put your hands together to welcome Satya. We have Divya here with us. Divya Kandukuri is an Ambedkarite feminist activist, trainer, writer, and media practitioner. She is the founder of The Blue Dawn, a mental health collective that upholds anti-caste and feminist politics in its functioning. The Blue Dawn brings caste and mental health to the forefront of India's mental health discourse through a social justice lens. As a trainer with The Blue Dawn, Divya empowers social workers, media professionals, and mental health practitioners to integrate feminist and social justice into their work. Divya draws from her experience as an intercaste, interfaith individual exploring the intersections of caste, gender, pop culture, and mental health. Divya has gotten her international diploma in narrative practices in 2021. This year, Narrative Practices, in collaboration with Blue Dawn, has launched a diploma in anti-caste mental health practices. The first online batch is graduating very soon, and the next offline batch is going to be hosted here in Bengaluru in 2025. Please welcome Divya Kandukuri. And along with me, representing Mitra Trust, is the founder of Mitra Trust. We have Bhairavi here. She is the mind behind 2 mental health kits that have been rolled out. The first is the Main Kit, Riding Out Depression, which was crowdfunded, rolled out during the pandemic across India for anyone riding the waves of depression. And the second, which we launched very recently, known as Knowing Trauma. It is a website, a resource for survivors of any form of abuse. Knowing Trauma was created with the intention of creating resources that addresses trauma, triggers, and the impact created on the mind and the body while actually looking at marginalized queer identities. All resources and services provided by Team Mitra are free of cost and remain accessible online. Bhairavi is also a social innovation management graduate from the Amani Institute and is also trained in applied Buddhist psychology, which is where we met for the first time as students, and is also certified in trauma care practice. Please put your hands together. Welcome, Bhairavi. Wonderful. So we're going to jump straight in. My first question is to Raga. We're going to start right at the source of all information. We're going to start at the newsroom. So tell us, Raga, you as a queer journalist, you run a news program for sensitivity towards the queer community. What is the mental health reality that you see in your line of work?
Right. So they gave me the mic first because they're all like, okay, let Raga say something, and then there'll be enough to actually correct Raga. I'm guessing. That's the reason. So I'm a journalist, and there are 2 things that I want to talk about here, right? So the first thing is how the media covers mental health, or how the media covers queerness itself. And there is a lot to sort of talk about there. And the second is how in the media we do deal with, like, mental health issues, or not even issues, just like sort of keeping ourselves sane or keeping ourselves alive enough to be human beings, right? So those are 2 separate but interconnected things, I would say. And the first thing is when it comes to how the media covers queer persons or queerness, queer issues, I guess the reality is that for most people who hold power in media organizations, most journalists who are cisgender, heterosexual, they do look at queerness as itself as a mental illness, right? You use terms like dysphoria, you sort of want to pathologize, is this person, what were they before, what have they become now? Or, what was their name before, why are they like this, right? Those are the questions that are in the minds of the journalists, which essentially means that they have not engaged enough with queer communities. And I say communities because we are not like one monolith, right? Like there is no one queer community anywhere in the world. So you've not engaged enough, right? And in the media, again, you see like health, or pre-pandemic, I would say, or like arts. All of these are considered like soft beats. So queerness sort of gets fit into this features, soft beat kind of thing. And what do people actually expect out of reporters who are talking about a certain issue? Now, if you're a political reporter, you're on a beat, your beat is like Congress, right? You're expected to know what the party is about. You're expected to know who the leaders in the party are. You are expected to know something about politics before you start covering politics. Same for like crime, right? You're supposed to know what are the different ranks of police. Like these are all things that you're expected to know, you're expected to learn. Except when it comes to any kind of marginalization, and I will talk about like queerness as a marginalization here, nobody is expected to know anything. So you're like, arey, we don't know only, why are you like, yelling at us? So the constant complaint that comes from journalists when anybody makes a mistake or like, writes something extremely insensitive or puts out a piece of news media that is ridiculous, and when they get called out is, oh, but we didn't know, right? You can't fault us for not knowing. So, which is why Inclusive Newsrooms was born. So, it was a project by Queer Chennai Chronicles and the News Minute. And QCC, Mauli and I were talking about it during QCC does a Lit Fest every year. And during the pandemic, we had a session on, does the media actually have any style guide? Do you guys have any guidelines for how to cover like, queer issues and everything? And the answer was no. There is no like standard guideline or anything of that sort. So we said, okay, let's do it. Let's sit together and like, make this happen. So we started doing this, and then we found some funding on the way, and we've been able to do like trainings for journalists across the country. We've launched a fellowship, and we've been able to sort of say, if you are coming from that place, and I will not assume that all of you are coming from the place of being bigoted or, deliberately wanting to hurt queer people, but you're coming from the place of, I don't know, then, hey, this is a resource for you to learn. The other thing, and I'm just like looking at the timer, is mental health of journalists itself, right? And I think newsrooms are spaces that are very mildly put toxic, right? Like there is like a lot of yelling that happens. There is a lot of screaming. My colleagues from NWMI are here, and we just recently released a sort of document to talk about like how newsrooms can do better. So newsrooms themselves are spaces where, just to share like one personal experience, before I came out as queer, I was in a newsroom where the editor-in-chief sort of came into the thing and said, now these people, about queer people, right? Now these people are going to like sit in the newsroom with us, is it? They're going to sit in the studio with us and like discuss things with us, is it? And these are the kind of language, this is the kind of language that you hear from very senior journalists, right? On the outside, they may be like, perfect. They have the politically correct language because it's easy to learn that politically correct language. But on the inside, you're not creating any kind of like, space for people from marginalized identities to actually feel safe and like thrive, right? So how do we have more queer journalists? Like that is something that I think we need to talk about.
Thank you, Raga. My next question is for Divya. Blue Dawn does some path-breaking work when it comes to mental health. One part of it is a lot of, there's crowdfunding, there's sponsorship that you move towards, for caste-oppressed people to access mental health care, to access like quality mental health care. And you also try and connect them with mental health practitioners from across India who do opt in anti-caste lens. Why is this so important for understanding the reality of queer health?
Thank you for the question. Jai Bhim, everyone. I think the answer is also very straightforward, but before like I answer that, I just want to talk when you say the realities, right, like of queer health in itself. There is also an intersection that we have to look at, because queerness does not exist in isolation. Like a queer person can also be a person coming from a marginalized community. That could be via religion or caste. It could be both from religion and caste, right? And through Blue Dawn's work over the last 6 years, one thing that I have learned is that, of course, we all are here, so we know that talking about mental health in itself is a fight in this country. And then when we had to talk about mental health of people coming from both queerness and of people coming from oppressed caste communities has been like really, really tough, especially as if you are someone from that community, right? And as I was talking to you all also before, like whatever I'm going to say is about people who are living in the cities, because the language that we are using right now here also, queerness, or if you say body dysmorphia, kya hota hai, mental health kya hota hai, all these words are like things that I can say in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Delhi, right? If I come from this coastal place called Ongole in Andhra Pradesh, if I go back home and say ki, you know, I am queer or I am from, like, you know, I have mental health issues, nobody would understand what this means. And that is the reality of this country, where the majority of population is living. Like, not all of us are living in the cities. When I go back home, like, I cannot say that, okay, mere ko anxiety hai, I want to sit in my room. Nobody is going to understand. Or if I have to say, ki, I think I need support, then people would be, okay, we'll take you to Eragadda Mental Hospital, or we'll take you to a religious setting where the booth would be like, you know, taken out of you. And this is the majority reality of India. And this is the one side where we are still fighting the stigma at the base level. And there are people who could come across, like, you know, come over that base level of stigma and get educated and try to get into spaces where you can access mental health. And the struggle is of there again, like, is mental health care in India accessible at all? When I say accessible, not just in terms of money or funding, but also is the language accessible? Is the approach accessible? How many queer affirmative practitioners do we have in the country, out of which how many of them are anti-caste by default? Again, because the therapy room in itself is so unsafe, because we all talk about conversion therapy. In that, there is also, what if the person is also casteist? What about the safety of a young person, an 18-year-old young queer person who comes from an oppressed caste community in that therapy room? Who is going to keep that therapist accountable in the country, or keep that psychiatrist accountable in the country? We have no such mechanisms in place where we can hold systems in, we can question systems, or we can hold systems accountable. That space also is there. Again, that is also the biggest reality of country, which makes it impossible for us to even talk about accessing services. We are still talking about breaking the stigma and bringing these conversations to the forefront. And that has been really difficult, to be very honest. And also, to do this work, you also need funding. When I say funding, not at organizational level, but at an individual level also for everyone. Like, as you mentioned, Blue Dawn has been trying to sponsor individuals to access one therapy session. So what we do is we believe in this whole giving back to the community, pay back to society model. And if you are someone who can afford to sponsor someone's session, we encourage you to sponsor. And this has been being done on a goodwill level. So like, today you would sponsor one session for me and I would go. But again, that is also not sustainable. So the system in itself is so against people who come from certain marginalizations that it's becoming harder and harder. And I also believe, while there is a larger conversation in India that's happening on queerness, that is also like accepting of the intersections of caste and religion in it, there is still a block, and there is also regression that is happening openly. To be honest, I feel like this is a very small space where we can talk about these things than 5 years ago. But we are also regressing simultaneously on the side. Outside this room, I don't know if all of us can openly talk about things that we are talking about. Again, that is also the reality of this country. I hope I answered.
Thank you, Divya. My next question is for Bhairavi. In Mitra Trust, we conduct therapeutic spaces, which we try to go beyond the idea of diagnoses. We try to go beyond these regular structures and labels that exist in mental health spaces. We have folks accessing our spaces from across the country, across spectrums, across marginalizations. So in your work with Mitra Trust, and having seen this through, we have a session called Queering the Matrix, where we speak to folks who are just beginning to unpack their gender and sexual identities. So in all this, what do you see as the reality of queer mental health?
So I have to start off by saying I need to acknowledge all the privileges I have. Because I'm here as an ally, as a cishet woman. I am not queer, but I've run an organization that supports this. I was born into an oppressor caste. There are certain things that we can do, there are certain things we can learn, there are certain things that we can unlearn. And I think acknowledging some of those privileges is super important as we kind of begin this conversation, right? So I began Mitra, I'm a psychologist, I began Mitra because I saw there's this space that's there between, because everybody thinks mental health is one-on-one therapy. And I'm like, no, there is more. We need community. And what does community look like? And why is community important? So we began with removing labels. So we call our sessions the meh sessions. The meh because you're meh. It doesn't matter. Is it depression, anxiety, trauma? Like what is going on doesn't matter. You just know that you're not okay. And that's all it takes for you to come in and access the space. Around COVID, what we started seeing was there were two communities that embraced us. Queer community, those who face gender-based violence, so sexual abuse, physical violence, verbal abuse. And we were doing something right. And we were trying to figure out what we were doing because it was organically happening. Organically, they were telling us that they're feeling safe in our spaces. So we looked at it and we saw that one thing that we're doing is that we have lived experiences. Every single one of our mental health practitioners also has lived experience. Every single person who works in our team, whether they're a creative facilitator, whether they're a designer, whether they're a sociologist, also has lived experience. And this then shows up in the spaces, shows up in the sessions. So we started doing unlearning and relearning. If this is the groups that we're looking at and that are coming into our spaces, what do we then need to do? So in one of the sessions that I run, it's called Let's Discuss the Meh. It's a 2.5-hour talking space. 6 people come and we talk about all the things that are bothering us, things that are not okay. We started noticing a lot of conversations around, I've been to one-on-one therapy. They told me that my gender identity, the questionings that I'm doing, my sexuality, the questionings I'm doing is because of trauma. Now, this is one of the most regressive, hurtful, harmful things that can be said. And the amount of pain that it then causes the person to think that this is the reason why I am like this, it's because of a series of horrific incidents that have happened to me, it's just unconscionable. Like, even if you think about being in that space and listening to it, it's horrific, it's heartbreaking. As a mental health practitioner then in that space, what can I do? I can apologize for the mental health community. But the beauty of the space is you have people around that are like, hey, that happened to me too. Here are the reasons why it's not real. Here are the reasons why this is what I did when somebody told me this. This is how I engage with it. This is how I move forward. Talk to these people. They help me. Don't go to these professionals. Go to these set of professionals. Community becomes really, really important. So it was around that time also that there were a lot of questions that were coming into the space around, I think I'm queer, I don't know. What does queerness really look like? I don't look like a queer person. There's an idea, an understanding of what a queer person supposedly looks like. I don't have tattoos, I don't have my septum pierced, so therefore I might not be queer. So I reached out to a colleague who we'd worked on a couple of projects before, Joe, who's a sociologist, and I said, we need to bring in cultural knowledge. We need to bring in sociological, anthropological knowledge into the space. So we started queering the matrix. So in queering the matrix, we address this. We look at what is queerness, what makes you queer. It brings theory into practice. In your day-to-day life, what does that then look like? One of the other things that it also did is we started decolonizing automatically because we took power away from structures and we gave language. There's a shared sense of language that comes in. We reframed old language that was there. We created new language for ourselves, which became really, really important. Another thing that we found, which was equally heartbreaking, was, again, because it's mental health issues that we deal with, you have people who are in hospitals often. They are in treatments very often. And once they get hospitalized, they are, the only names that are used were the names assigned at birth, gender assigned at birth. So they go in with the best of intentions and they say, I'm here, I want treatment, I want to get better. But they are invalidated at every single step. your psychiatrist, your clinical psychologist, your nurse practitioner, your social worker, everybody is invalidating you. So your levels of distress are so high. Can you imagine if they were just a little human? And they're like, yes, we want you to get better too. Tell us the name that you would like to be called. Tell us the pronouns. So these little bits of safety bubbles that we can bring in, I think as much as we can in all the spaces that we can, it's up to us to kind of unlearn and learn and bring that in. Right? That's my time.
So we have some more time before we go into the next round of like serious talking and all of that. We're in a mental health festival. We're in a room full of mental health practitioners of different kinds. We are in a room full of students who are perhaps studying to be mental health practitioners, people on the receiving end of mental health care services. This is open to any of you. Where do you think we can start in the community of mental health?
It's completely fine.
This is neurodiversity in action.
That's completely fine. Let me. So before we jump in and talk about, what we can do on a day-to-day basis, I will just finish my part. What is the mental health reality in my area of work. So I'm an advocate. I practice in Chennai, all courts. So if you are, a non-queer advocate, you are entering into a profession which is basically litigation. We don't do corporate. We only do litigation. So just in the entry stage, one of your priorities is not mental health. If you have that as one of your priorities, you cannot get into a litigation office and start your career. And if you are any client who wants to pursue any case through litigation and go to the court, your mental health, you have to leave your mental health in the door before you enter the courts. That is how it is. And all of this are compounded if you are a queer lawyer or a queer affirmative lawyer or a queer client who is fighting for one of your cases or your rights or for your partner. So how we look at this is, the baseline is that how the lived experience of a queer affirmative or a queer lawyer and the lived experiences of queer clients who are struggling to get their rights affirmed by our courts, be it a constitutional court, high court, or the district courts, not even courts, even with respect to just dealing with police harassment or finding crisis intervention and finding the first legal aid that you can find at times where, your partner is illegally detained by their parents, by their own natal families. So the struggle is just compounded there if you are a queer client. So with respect to, queer affirmative lawyers, just for any lawyer, the profession is not welcoming or friendly of any marginalized community at all. It is specifically designed and run by people who are not friendly or welcoming of any of these identities. And for example, one of my close friends went to, they are, 2 or 3 years into this profession, not human rights work, just a regular lawyer. They say it's a regular lawyer because queer affirmative human rights are not core issues. Regular lawyer, let's say, regular lawyer. So, and then, when they go to the regular lawyer and, who is their boss and they say, I think I need therapy because, I'm having difficulty. And they are given the answer, you need God and not therapist. And they say that, you're weak if you're going to go to therapy. And this is the kind of answer given to even those who are in the profession and struggling, let's say, even 2 years into this profession. And when you are out and when you are going to come out, it's not possible. And you're coming out and saying you are either a queer advocate or you are a queer affirmative advocate who is fighting for queer rights, you're automatically put in a box. Okay, so these are these people will only do these type of work, and these type of work is not lawyer work, there's just pure activism. That's all, you're branded. This is one of the reasons why many advocates do not want to call themselves queer affirmative, first of all, even though they really want to do, or they are already doing the work, but they just do not want. Because of this, because of them not telling that they are queer affirmative, many people cannot access the legal services that certain advocates are offering. And this is with respect to queer advocates. So sometimes, when this is happening, because people are saying that, okay, you guys do this type of activism, sometimes it's very difficult for me, my partners here, for us to take ourselves seriously, even though we are the ones who file habeas corpuses for gay couple, fighting for, illegal detention. We go to the shelter homes, trying to stop the police from taking a person, a queer woman, or anybody, a trans woman, because, a missing persons complaint is filed somewhere, 500 kilometers away. The police, forgetting all the other cases, they will just take the jeep and come all the way, crossing 500 kilometers, just so that they can take this particular queer person and hand them over to their family. And then the whole illegal detention part continues. So even though when we do this work, it's extremely, it's a struggle for us to take ourselves seriously. So what are we doing? So our mental health is in that situation, because of what the mainstream litigation is about. And when you are the queer client, okay, so queer clients, let's talk about queer and trans clients. They must be in a job, or they must be facing a lot of other things with respect to family, let's say conversion therapy, mental health, whatever. And then they go to a point where they need the help of the court, or they need lawyer in the picture. And someone is approaching us. So what the system does is they just ruin their mental health further. The system ruins the queer person's mental health further, only because they want to fight their case, only because they want some legal help, because there is no queer affirmative services available anywhere, and the litigation and the courts and the judges are not queer friendly at all. And I just wanted to talk about two of our experiences. One is that even when we go to the extent of fighting for habeas corpus, where one of them is detained, let's say that we go to the highest possible solution available to us in a particular state. We have seen cases where we were personally threatened only because we are fighting for a queer person's rights. And we have to do everything in our capacity to shield our client and also to shield ourselves. So every time when the system is telling us that you are not supposed to do these type of cases, you cannot talk about these rights, we are pushed to a place where we have to take a break and then restart it and re-strategize and come to the system from a different lens.
And what we saw here was a combination of what it means to navigate each of these systems on a personal level as queer folk, and also to navigate these at a systemic level. And what does it mean? How does it then affect the mental health of us queer folks? So, yeah, coming back to the other question that I was asking earlier, which was, yes, we're in a mental health festival, room full of practitioners. Where do you think each of us can begin to better understand queer mental health, and while also integrating a intersectional approach?
So first, I want to talk from again, my line of work and what a day-to-day action plan can look like is we need more queer affirmative lawyers coming and fighting for queer rights, and without bearing the burden that they have to come out as queer. The one more problem that we see when we go to the national level and trying to find advocates who can help us in different cases is that even though they are queer affirmative, there are a lot of people who think that you don't have to be necessarily calling yourself queer affirmative, but that is a difficulty that we're facing. Unless you call yourself that, unless you try to be really queer affirmative, people are not going to access the services that you're getting. So we need more queer affirmative lawyers. Then, with the help of queer affirmative mental health practitioners, these go hand in hand. And then, all those people who are in need of help can seek the help that they want. This is from my line of work.
I think for mental health practitioners or anyone who wants to be an ally, there are a few ways to do that. One is to read, listen to podcasts, watch movies, TV shows. There's a show called Heartstopper that came out that has the best book list. Like, they give you a list of books to read. And those books range anywhere from like illustrated comic style books to deep, beautiful narratives. Listen to podcasts. There's a beautiful podcast that First Post did called Cast in the USA. It's a little distant from us, yet we can see all of the issues that are there. When we're able to consume information like this, when we're able to talk to others like this, then it's not up to marginalized folks to constantly tell us, for them to bear the brunt of teaching us. So there is a little bit that we do need to do in terms of unlearning and learning, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to have conversations. When you do it as a group, if 2 or 3 of you are doing it together, you can actively have conversations. You can be like, hey, I thought of this. What about pronouns? What do you think their pronouns are? Ask somebody what their pronouns are. For no one knows what pronouns are unless you ask them. And when you meet them again, just check in. What are your pronouns? It's very simple, small things that you do that goes a really, really long way. It isn't a course that you need to take. It's just things that you do in your day-to-day life to unlearn a little bit, and just again, like open heart, open mind at the end of the day. That's all that it takes.
Okay. What do journalists need in terms of mental health? I think one reality is whichever profession you're in, whether it's journalism, whether it is law, whether whatever it is, one problem is that we are living in a world where everything is sort of becoming contractual. Everything is sort of like, you don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. You don't know whether you have consistent money to pay rent and pay bills, right? So I think a lot of money for everybody would solve a lot of problems. So I think, no, seriously, like, you know, if you're not worried about where your meals are coming from, if you're not worried about, you know, am I going to be able to afford therapy, right? I think the work that Blue Dawn is doing, the work that Mitra is doing, all of this, right? And even when you're talking about, like, you know, queer affirmative legal practitioners and all of that, where is the money? So we are living in, as my partner Nadika loves to say, we are living in end stage capitalism. So if you don't have money, then you don't know how to sort of deal with anything else. The second thing is for journalists or queer journalists as such, right? Like, 2 things. One is newsrooms need to do better. A lot of times, I mean, I also run a small WhatsApp group and like a mailing list for queer journalists. And if a young person comes and asks me, like, you know, should I come out to my colleagues or should I come out in my newsroom? And I'm like, no. And I'm not saying this because I'm taking decisions for you, but you know what you talked about earlier, Satya, right? Like, you were put into a box, first of all, right? And secondly, you don't know how safe that place is. When you're young, when you're entering a workplace, you don't know how safe that space is. So why would you sort of, you know, put yourself out there and become a target, right? So if the system is not safe, then you're just like, you know, putting a target on your back and saying, come. Like, you know, either put me into those stories which hardly anybody will read, or, you know, don't give me the work that I actually want to do, or like, you know, just harass me in ways that, you know, talking behind your back, you're like sort of saying everything comes down to your queerness, right? Anything that you say will be because you're like this, that's why you're saying this, right? And newsrooms, like I was saying earlier, are not places which are very, I mean, yeah, we are supposed to be democratic spaces, we are supposed to be spaces where there is a lot of debate happening, and yes, that does happen, but is it a safe space? No. Right? So that is the thing, I think, systemic level. What newsrooms need to be doing is make sure that you have some systems in place, right? Like, the news industry is one that across the world has not at all bothered to look into HR practices, right? Like, HR is just I mean, if IT people complain about HR, we complain about the fact that we don't even have HR, right? So that, I think, is, start treating people as human beings, right? And then start looking at all of their needs, all of their mental health needs. And I think, you know, one of my friends was talking about how, like, you know, reasonable accommodation is something that people have been talking about. In a newsroom, what is a reasonable accommodation? We've not even reached that conversation, right? So when somebody says, I'm struggling with my mental health, you're like, okay, you know, we put up with so much more. We put up with this. My editor said this to me. Bro, like, you know, like, let's take a deep breath. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about, you know, what is it that we need? Can we survive in this place where, one, you don't have full-time jobs, everybody is a freelancer, everybody is like, where is my money coming from? Second, if you do get a full-time job, then you have to stick to it, right? Like, you don't want to get fired. Then you don't want to talk about, oh, I have this, I'm struggling, right? Like, I'm not able to survive, but if I don't turn up to work today, then I don't know if I have the job next month. So how do we have that conversation? How do we sort of treat each other like human beings? I think it's like a larger structure issue and not just about like, what individuals can do. So I think, yeah, we need to deconstruct all of that, right? We need to deconstruct everything that we've said, okay, yeah, we have to deal with it, we have to deal with it. You have to stop dealing with it, and then we can actually talk about like, what is mental health, I guess.
Yeah, I think all of you covered most of the points. So I just have like 3 things to add. I usually do this like almost in every one of my workshops as well. Very base level things which we forget to do as human beings also. One of the things as someone working in the mental health field is that as practitioners or care workers, we forget that people that we are working with, communities that we are working with, are also people with their own caliber to figure out their own liberation and figure out their own, issues. And the fact that we are not going there to empower anybody, right? Like for example, in most of the NGO spaces or in most of the mental health spaces, there is this famous program that everyone does, like community outreach. Or like, we are working at the grassroots level with community. So what is this grassroots that you are talking about? Who are these people? What is the gaze that you are entering this quote-unquote grassroots with? Do they actually need you, or the things or the resources have been taken away from them? That is why you are going back, actually giving the resources back to them. This gaze also has to be changed at a mental health sector level in India itself, because the work culture has always been a top-down approach. No matter which community that we are working with, we always feel that since we are experts, quote unquote, we have these degrees. So I am an expert on your mental health. I am an expert on, okay, I'm working with this Adivasi communities who they don't know anything. I am expert on their mental health. I will go and tell them what they will need to better their mental health. That's like nobody needs that. Everybody knows what they need. The fact that we have to address is that why are we even going with this gaze and question that gaze and talk about what the community wisdom has always been. Like, because the communities have survived even before all of us existed. Communities are living with their own ways of living. There is always the conversations of healing that happen. I'll just take like a minute extra to talk about how like there is this thing, I've written about it many times. Like my mother, she is not literate and she comes from a rural space, but all the women like my mother, they do at evening 4 p.m. in the town. Like in small towns, you can sit outside your houses, right? There is this, we say banda in Telugu, like there will be a space where all the women come gather around 4 p.m. which like men usually call them as, oh, ye to gossip karne beti. Like, women are here to just gossip. But through these gossip sessions, like I was very curious as a child to know what these women always talk about every day, because they would swear a lot. I cannot tell you like how much they swear. That too in Telugu, very creatively they would swear. So I would be so curious too, like, and I would always sneak in and listen. Like of course, they would talk about movies and like, desire in a different way. They'll talk about Telugu heroes in their own zone, but they would also talk about the domestic violence that's been happening in their own houses. And they already came up with their own way of how to deal with domestic violence without any knowledge. Like without any, knowledge is wrong, like without any vocabulary for it that we can put it in our annual reports. They have their own way of dealing with it. Like they came up with this system called Chiti Pata. I think Kitty it's called across, where like for example, if 3 of us need 30 rupees, we'll put 10 rupees each every month. And this month, Rahel, you need those 30 rupees, so you would get it. And it goes in rotation, right? And all these women have done this Chiti Pata, got their children educated, got a first ever set of gold earrings for their daughters, and I'm one of those daughters of that group of crazy women that I'm crazy emphasis on that, because they do all have mental health issues also. And that is their way of like dealing with it, and that is the wisdom that they have developed. Now as a practitioner, I cannot go and say, hey, you have PTSD from domestic violence, I'll come and cure you. That's not going to happen, and this language is not going to work there. So looking at that, like, incorporating what these women have already said, how they have already articulated, incorporating that into our curriculums is what we lack. And also, why are we even negating this wisdom? Is it because it's coming from the women who are not, first, that because it's coming from women, or second, is it coming from women that you think are like, not capable of being in spaces like this? That is my first point. Second one is, I'll not take much time. Second one being the fact that we were talking how queer liberation, or like being any anti-prejudice in itself, is also being anti-caste, right? Like fundamentally, as a society, we are a caste-based society. The social fabric of this country is based on caste system, right? And if we are not questioning why utensils are separate for our domestic workers and us, and why the domestic worker is sitting on the floor in our house and not on the sofa, hum log jitna bhi, like, whatever panels we do, it's not gonna change anything. Like, even questioning these at our own houses individually on daily basis will make larger difference. We don't have to go sit at a protest and say, I'm not asking you to give Jai Bhim ke naare at like protests. Just question what is happening in your own houses first, then only we can like think more. My third thing is my most favorite thing, what Babasaheb Ambedkar said. I also have a tattoo of it. He just said 3 words, which I think are quite amazing. He said, educate, agitate, and organize. And it applies to individuals and as a community and as a society as well. And I live by that in my practice as well as a feminist and Ambedkarite. And I think once we incorporate this approach, things will be better, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Divya. So that made a great segue into what individual actionable steps can then look like. When we're talking about systems, we're always imagining something so larger than life. We're moving a mountain as one single person, and it's very, very, very daunting in conversations like this. And it's also important for us to talk about individual actionable steps, because otherwise a discourse remains a discourse, a panel discussion remains a panel discussion. What are we going to do once we get out of that room? What are we going to do right after this conversation? So thank you, Divya, for touching upon that. So I will throw this back to Satya. What can I do at an individual level to navigate the legal system, which is otherwise also very, very daunting?
With respect to individual level, there is very little a person who is in the end and trying to reach out to the system can do, but we need transformations happening within the system. That is, we need more queer affirmative judges who will fight their prejudices and who will not reflect their prejudices in their judgments, in the way how they are dealing with the cases. And we not just judges, we also need trainings and sensitizations repeatedly and routinely happening for police and people who are working one-stop centers and caseworkers and all those who are directly in touch with any crisis intervention. We need more sensitizations and awareness happening there. So whatever we can do in our capacity to make sure that the persons who are in bureaucracy or law enforcement can understand and understand the knowledge about sexuality and gender identities, and especially caste. I think like that is what is something that is needed right now.
I don't know, what can we do to make life better for journalists? Give us news every day. That solves half the problem, because then our bosses are not like shouting at us or whatever. But I think talking about like queer mental health at large, one of the things is, we love the word intersectionality. Queer people are everywhere, right? We are in your houses. We are your friends. We are there everywhere. You may not know whether we are queer or not, right? But we are there everywhere, every family, whatever your religion is, whatever your class is, whatever your caste is, whatever language you speak, right? And that essentially means that in our homes and in our daily interactions, whatever your profession is, whatever it is, right? Like, just try and be a little bit more sensitive. Hear yourself, hear what you're saying, and hear whether, if somebody around you was queer and they were listening to you, how is it like sort of impacting them, right? Because I have been a journalist longer than I have been queer, in the sense that I came out much later in my career, which means that in newsrooms I have heard a lot of bigotry. I have heard people say a lot of things that are harmful. You may not know that you're causing harm, but just because, you know, whether it's your WhatsApp group or whatever it is, like just be a little bit more aware of what you're saying, I guess. And for the journalism community, I think do no harm would be to say, you know, if you're a journalist, then make sure that what you're writing is more informed and you're not like, you know, sort of falling back on rhetoric or falling back on, there's this favorite thing that I like to say is like, you know, dial an activist, right? So don't just like pick up the phone and say, I will, you know, call the person who will pick up my call and give me a quote that is like, you know, going to fit into those two lines. But diversify your sources, queer lived experiences. We're not one community, right? Like we're not, again, the fact that we're in all of your homes also means that our castes are different. Our social locations are different. Our classes are different. Our languages are different. So try and make sure that all of that is represented in journalism. All of that is like represented in news, and not just, you know, the first person who will pick up your call and you keep quoting them again and again. We all know who that top 3 people will be in the newspapers, right? So go beyond that. Go beyond that and like look at like more experiences. For journalists, that's what I would, I think, say. Yeah.
So I look at founders and I look at mental health professionals both. For founders, I think you need to seriously think about what does inclusion look like, and not just from a D&I perspective, but lived experience perspective. What does that look like? How do you ensure that in the work that you do, there is lived experience that is represented? From mental health practitioners, learn, study. We're not taught any of these things. We don't come into workplaces knowing these things. There are courses available. Sign up for Divya's course. I didn't get in. Hopefully I'll get in next time. But sign up, do these courses, learn. There's so much of unlearning. There's so much of learning. And especially courses that happen in India. They're so rare to have a course like this. They're so rare to have pure mental health practices course that's based in India. Most of us like to go do these online certifications from abroad and get it. Ground in our realities, ground in our cultures, in our day-to-day to see what is working and what is not working.
We have about 6 or 7 minutes left. This is now open to audience Q&A. Please try and keep it short. And also maybe you could directly address it to the person that you want to ask it to.
First of all, I'm very jealous that my panel yesterday didn't have this much crowd. But it's also extremely important to see an entirely female panel talking about queerness.
It's not.
No,
It's
but
not.
it is. Because
It's
us
not,
gay
it's
men...
not, it's not. I'm just telling you that it's not an entirely female panel. And as a cis-het person, please listen
Sure.
to us. Thank you.
So us gay men tend to take up a lot of this space, and like I just did. My question goes to the legality and the law. So that goes specifically to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I take 2 more questions, because we really have to close at 4? Yeah. One more question there. You didn't ask the question.
My question was the legality, and can you explain a little bit more about the challenges that you face as an advocate, specifically working in the legal space?
Thank you. Yeah. We'll take 3 questions. So that's for Satya. Yeah.
Okay, so can I answer now or will we wait for the questions? Okay.
I will extend it by 5 more minutes, but you can answer it.
Am I audible now? Yes. So my question, I don't know if I'll get an answer, but still I would like to question. One is observation and the other is question. The observation is that in the panel, I don't see anybody from NIMHANS. So that is one of the observation, but I'm sure like there will be many doctors who are sitting here who will be from the NIMHANS and would be able to answer the question. The question part is that does NIMHANS have enough queer affirmative practitioners when it comes to psychiatrists and then psychologists? Because if one queer person comes to seek the services and NIMHANS sees people in large numbers on a daily basis, like in thousands, so where you will have many queer people. So if they come to avail the services, is there a proper channel wherein these people are sent, or else are they just rejected on the basis saying that we don't have enough queer trained professionals? So that is my question and an observation. Thank you.
We might not be able to answer that because I'm not sure if we have anyone else. Not all our panels have folks from NIMHANS, so we'll try and see if we can get a response to that. Thank you.
Hi. My question is for Divya or anybody else who wants to answer. It's specifically about anti-caste practices in mental health, because in our institutes, from where I studied psychology, I'm a practitioner, caste doesn't come at all. We're grabbing onto Freud and all these, even queer affirmative, the word we use is a Western terminology, it doesn't resonate with people. And somehow a lot of Savarna practitioners have built it into their resume, even if they don't understand what queer affirmative practices are. But when it comes to caste, it is still not very, very less person. I would say in single digits percentages would be there practitioners who openly say they're anti-caste or they understand caste. And I think caste is the fundamental thing that people need to understand after they reach queerness, because caste is the fabric of our society, right? So how do we, considering the institute we are in right now or other institutes, because you work in this, right? Creating that pedagogy which gives people the vocabulary to talk about caste. How do we take this work forward? Those who are working in the mental health field or the social sector, anything intersecting with mental health. Because for me personally, if there's no caste talk, if it comes to mental health, it's hollow. It's hollow. So thank you so much for being here and getting that element. It's so important. That's it.
Do we want to take one more question before I hand it over to the audience? To the speakers? Great. Okay. Okay. Just one more. Then I think we can extend by some time.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to ask, I was also working with an NGO, and as Divya was mentioning that we often use this, savior complex gaze. So I wanted to know, how we can have, a social work or a rehabilitation lens rather than someone who is constantly, especially in psychology, we're always pathologizing someone and we're always looking at a very clinical, oh, this person has anxiety and they're only focused on that. And it's not very systemic, right? So how do we talk, or how as people who work in NGOs or volunteer, how do we establish a very social work lens or social justice lens? So that's...
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers a spectrum. So take it over.
So that's a very broader question. I can go on and on, but I'll keep it very short. So we have our successes and we have our failures when we have to fight in the court. We see it in two stages. We try to not take it to court in many occasions where it just ends in pre-litigation stages. And there are cases where we have to go to court. Just example, the marriage equality case judgment, which came in October 2023, popularly known as the same-sex rights case, marriage rights case. So there, even though queer persons were denied rights to marry, trans persons were given the rights to marry. And this was in October 2023. There was a trans cis couple who wants to get married, and they were not able to register their marriage, even though the judgment was 5 months old at that time, and you know how popular the case was. But we are going to the registrar office to register the marriage, and no, they have absolutely no idea about this, and they're like, what is this? And the questions and the stereotyping and the discrimination. And then at that point, we try our best to finish this in pre-litigation stage. We are not able to. So at that point, we are forced to go to the court. And we get a positive order where the court says, why are you not getting them married? You have a judgment, marry them. But again, it's not easy. Even after seeing the court order, it took us 2.5 months to get their marriage registered. And after even there, we have to stand there personally the whole day trying to explain to them the judgment, the Supreme Court judgment, giving them, look, what this particular judge has said. We have to do it. Just having a judgment is not enough. But there is an extreme gap between the reality and what the courts have said. So that's one of the struggles.
Do you want to refer to the tool that the
Yes. So we have on that QR code.
Yeah, we can put up the QR code.
So you can have reference there. So, yeah.
You just want to briefly tell what that
So this is a very brief, ready reckoner, know your rights for LGBTQIA persons. You can download it. It's like a 10-page booklet. We have, obviously there are a lot of issues, but we have tried to keep it into 6 or 7 major issues. We have also covered Mental Health Care Act and the LGBTQIA community, the Trans Act, the trans rules, and the rules and the acts and what are the procedures under. And we have also given, if first step 1, go to step 1, go step 2, if not, go to the court. And then we've also dealt with the issues of family violence, how to deal with family violence, police harassment, conversion therapy, medical malpractices when it comes to gender-affirming surgery. All of that we have tried to cover. And also there is a resources page where, across India, whatever resources, for example, the inclusive newsrooms, glossary, and, support systems where queer affirmative, legal, and mental health services are provided in a website. You go to the website, you put your district and the state, you get the list of queer affirmative practitioners who are available. So all of that is available in this book.
Thank you so much for doing this for us. We'll have to, because we have to use this room for the next one, so maybe
So as you were asking, even with regards to queer affirmative practices in itself, I don't think any institution, for example, college, has directly put them in their curriculum. There would be guest lecturers coming in and teaching that. It's also because of the lots of resistance that's there against these practices in itself. So this is like a systemic change that has to come from within the institutions. But thankfully, over the last decade in India, there have been lots of organizations that are doing these courses on the side. And I think, again, like sadly, as we were talking about the realities in the beginning, that is the reality also because of the times that we are living in, that I don't see that any institute is going to incorporate actively, but also there are colleges like AUD and TIS who have feminist practices, queer practices part of their curriculum under specific diplomas that they offer. As far as I know, these two institutes have been doing.
Okay, the only thing I would say to you is to come up with shared language yourself. So we came up with the MEH. Come up with any kind of language yourself. If you don't want to use labels, if you don't want it to be depression, come up with your own language. As a community, as a group, the people that you're working with, the people that you're working for, be like, what can we call this? What can we call some of these things? And come up with that language. That's also very empowering. You're doing it together. And there's then that sense of ownership that comes in.
Okay, thank you so much to the audience for being part of this. This is a very important conversation. So thank you to the panelists.